You know what's really frustrating? You're successful in your career, you're running big projects, managing teams, perhaps you run a successful business, you've spent years building that career capital, and then you walk into a gym and you're a total beginner again. It's intimidating seeing other people in the gym. They look like they know what they're doing. They look successful, they look happy, and they look relaxed. But you're just overwhelmed. And what happens? You walk out the door and you don't return. If that sounds like you, then you're struggling with what it is to become a beginner again. So this episode of Beast the Burden is going to be perfect for you. One of the hardest skills to master, particularly as an adult, is to become a beginner again. My name's Paul. I run Beast of Burden, but also Hounds of Health here in Wandsworth, London, helping busy professionals take charge of their health, helping them reclaim their well-being in the face of all the other things they're having to deal with. And there's a lot for people to deal with. So, becoming a beginner. A lot of you probably watching this have a career, and if you're in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, maybe beyond, you've attained a certain level of competency that's seen you through all the ups and downs of the last 10, 15, 20 years. You've encountered so many scenarios that's given you a cool, calm, collected demeanor when you're at work. Many people thrive on pressure at work. They also really value the fact that they bring experience to the table. Then, and you look at yourself, maybe after 15, 20 years, having not done any exercise, that you need to get yourself back into the gym. And you realize you're quite far from where you used to be. Maybe you were an active teenager. Maybe you used to be into a sport, but you've been at the desk, you've had other things on your plate, you've built this career, you've got a family, you've spent a bit of time away from that health thing. You go into your local gym, you're surrounded by people who give the impression they know what they're doing. You sit there and go, this is too much. I've got enough on my plate. I don't like the idea. It's uncomfortable being a beginner. I'm overwhelmed. And it leads you just to give up on the whole enterprise. It's a really common thing. I speak to people every day. I'm on the phone making sales to people who've have approached us. They want to get fit and healthy. And the biggest thing when you're trying to sell a fitness program is to listen. The program is almost irrelevant if you've not spent the time to understand who you're talking to. And the common thing that I hear is not that people call themselves lazy, people call themselves unmotivated, people have quite negative words for themselves. And I'm often talking to extremely talented people. We are a personal training business. Personal training in many ways is a luxury. It's not an essential. It should be an essential, I would say that, but it's a luxury and we do a really good job. We're not a cheap, we're not a budget gym, we're not bottom of the barrel. We work with very talented individuals, people who are high performers, and we provide the appropriate experience for them. And these people are successful in their lives, but they feel like failures. And then they walk into our gym, and if we haven't got things right, they could be overwhelmed, intimidated, and feel like a failure right from the start. And becoming a beginner again is a massive, massive step backwards for some people mentally. Now, is it a bad thing? I'm not saying it is a bad thing. In fact, it's a really good thing to become a beginner again. But if you spent your life at the front line of your business or the front line of your industry being very competent, to go back to being a total beginner is very, very frustrating. Firstly, it dents the ego. I think for a lot of guys in particular who built their personality on their competency and their value in society, is one thing is as a young man, you have very little value in society. You don't have much skill, you don't have much money, and you're kind of reckless. So for society, they're like, you're not a surefire success. So when you've spent 20, 30 years and you've built up a lot of competency, a lot of value, a lot of men's egos can be dented and damaged by the fact that they've got to go back to the gym and they're a total beginner. They're worse than at being in the beginning because often they've atrophied. They're no longer like they were when they were 20, where they have all their youthful vigor. So that's often, for men particularly, very challenging for their ego. For women, they're often just so overwhelmed with other things because they've taken on a ton of responsibility, and they go back to being a beginner again because they're really competent at their work. They've got everything else in their life sorted. They've got great social lives. They've got busy family lives in which they've got great kids. They're balancing their diaries. They're balancing everything in their life. And then they go back into being into the gym, and as a beginner, and the amount of mental processing when you're a beginner is huge. Nothing is easy. Yeah, you can go into a certain amount of autopilot when you're competent because you've kind of compartmentalized certain behaviors, you've automated them, you're running systems and programs and well-worn paths and grooves that you've greased, and therefore the friction is very low. And that leaves you an amount of mental space to deal with very high-level subjects. And you may have built an interest and a competency around high-level things. You're not interested in the low-level stuff. That's what your graduates are doing. That's what the interns are doing. That's what lower-level people in your team are doing. You're now working on that higher level. You come into the gym, having spent 20 years away from the gym, and you're right at the bottom. You're that intern again. You're given the menial tasks. You're doing the basic things. You're finding everything frustrating. And that, can be a difficult thing to deal with. So what is it to become a beginner again? Now, I've been running my gym for years, and now I don't count myself as a beginner anymore. I still feel like I've got a lot to learn, but I'm no longer a beginner. So if I walk into any gym in the world, any environment, I'm going to have a certain level of competency I feel very confident with. And as a coach, you can be blinded by that. The first rule of thumb is any personal trainer is remember what it's like to be a beginner. Because if you don't remember what it's like, you will really lack any empathy with anyone who's coming in. So I find it really, really valuable for me as a coach to understand where someone's starting. I never coach on the phone when I speak to someone initially. I'm not interested in contradicting them, providing suggestions, giving them any coaching. I merely want to gather information to find out where that person is so that I understand what they're struggling with. But I also know that as soon as they walk through the door, everything is fresh, they're going to be overwhelmed. It's really easy for me, and I have to hold myself back to not overwhelm someone with too much information. I do kind of preface a lot of things whenever we're doing onboarding sessions and say, look, there's quite a lot for you to take in, and I don't expect you to remember it all. But what I would say is that you'll be doing similar things all the time, and eventually it'll become really, really simple. The way we program, the way we overcome that overwhelm, is that things don't really change a lot. We have a very systemized approach, which means after a couple of weeks, there's nothing new that's going to be thrown at you for the sake of theatre. The fact is that everything within the program is designed to just be repeatable, and you become more competent, you become more aware, more familiar, and it makes things easy. So everything I do in the business is designed to try and make that initial beginner anxiety disappear. So once we've got someone in, we're going to do an onboarding session before their program starts, because then they go into their first class not feeling completely overwhelmed. I think one of the big things you can do, particularly as a coach, is to break down that onboarding into sections which ramp things up slowly. As a beginner, you've also got to accept the fact that you're going to get a certain amount of overwhelm, and you are going to have a lot of new things thrown at you. So you've got to maintain a little part of your mental focus to concentrate on what you've signed up to. Recently, I took up, and I've mentioned it on previous episodes of this podcast, that I took up last year on the suggestion of my children. I've got a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. They were 6 and 9 at the time. I was taking up inline skating. My son, my 7-year-old, had got roller skates, the quads. He got them for his birthday. And then my 9-year-old at the time was like, right, I need to skate as well. I can't just have my youngest brother learning how to do it. So I started teaching them how to rollerblade, even though I couldn't do it myself. And eventually I thought, well, I've got to do this. I've got to learn how to do it. And I've never come across anything more frustrating than learning how to balance again. My God, it is frustrating learning a new skill. And I came from a movement competency. I've done personal training for many years. I've learned a level of competency in everything we do in this gym. I'm very confident going into it. I still believe I've got a lot to learn, but I'm not a beginner. On the rollerblades, I was a total beginner. I was worse than a beginner. I didn't have any natural ability for it. And falling over all the time is super, super frustrating. But I felt like I've got to learn this. And I thought, even if I don't get very good at it, and I'm much better at it now, and I still continue to do it a year later. I was out today, in fact. And again, the reason I'm doing this episode is because today was just one of those frustrating days where everything I did, I was awful at. And I felt like a total beginner again. Last time I was out, I felt great. I felt really confident. Today, I felt awful. It was really, really bad. I was just saying, why am I doing this? I don't even enjoy it today. But one of the benefits, the best case scenario is even if I didn't continue with it, I got to feel what it was like to become a beginner again. Starting a skill from scratch with no competency and just the humiliation, but that's particularly out in public. And I can tell you, guarantee, if you want to meet people that you know, particularly in London, which is a big city, if you want to bump into people randomly that you know, put on some rollerblades because everyone will find you. As soon as I go out on the rollerblades, I'll bump into people I don't see, just so they can laugh at me as I fall over or go down the street. So it's a great leveler. And so I've done that because I know the value of becoming a beginner again. I always think the one thing that martial arts do a lot of things that are really well. But they have like they have the belt system, you know, white belt through to black belt. And obviously they've got the increments depending on the martial art, you know, whether it's white, yellow, orange or green or blue or brown or whatever, all the little stripes in between. They do that to signify who's spent the most time learning and who's put the most focus in to acquire competency. In a gym, you walk into a gym and there is literally no indication that anyone on that, we've got a lat pull down machine here. When you go into your commercial gym, is the person using the lat pull down competent? You don't know. They look like they know what they're doing. There's often a load of 16-year-old men doing a bit of a pump with the cable machine. The best thing to use in a gym, if you want to find something free, is probably a barbell and a kettlebell, because no one's going to be using that. Everyone's going to be using the cable machine, okay, because it's easy. But they look competent and they're pushing, you know, but you don't know if they're any good. There's no indication. In a martial arts studio, you know the person with the black belt is going to be pretty good. And you probably know that they've spent more time there. And you probably know the person you're talking to who's got a white belt is a beginner like you, okay? So it can be very overwhelming. And I think you've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable, but also you've got to seek out places that allow you to become a beginner again. If you go into a gym and they expect competency from the outset, and you go in, there's no explanation, and you're thrown into movements that are too overwhelming for you, then you might need to take a step back and speak to someone there saying, look, yeah, maybe I've overwhelmed myself here. The first thing I like people to do is to reach out. We always say swim towards us when you're struggling. And, you know, you are gonna make mistakes. You've got to see the time that you walk through into our studio, particularly, is play. One of the things that kids bring to the table, where they know they're a beginner. So one thing you know as a kid, that you're fresh in this world. You know that there's, you know, you don't have experience. It's just a given. You don't walk in and say, why do I not know that? Oh, I'm a kid. I'm 7. Of course I don't know that. So kids give themselves some grace period, don't they? They say, you know what? I'm just going to learn this and play this. And if they've got good supportive family environment in which they can make mistakes, then, you know, kids learn really quickly. Whereas adults, we go in and we go, why am I not good at this? Why is this not happening tomorrow? Did you get good at your job in 6 weeks? No, it took you years. So why are you going to get good at fitness in a couple of weeks? I mean, I do a 12-week program and I do work with really mature people, but there's still an underlying kind of impatience. Why is this not changing? Look, give yourself time to build competency. If you talk to an intern at your workplace like you talk to yourself around your fitness goals, you'd probably be hauled up to HR and given a disciplinary, because most people are pretty cruel to themselves and they don't give themselves any patience and any grace period and any ability to make mistakes. Why am I not competent? Well, you're just not done enough practice. You're not giving yourself enough time. The number of reps you need to do is huge to master anything, from learning an instrument to swinging a kettlebell. And my coach, I've got a Russian coach. He's a Russian world champion in something called kettlebell sport. His name's Denis Vasilyev, and he's a monster. You know, he's like the nicest monster, because his physical ability is beyond anything that most people can even conceive. It's not until you have two 32-kilo kettlebells in your hands and understand what he is capable of doing with those two 32-kilo kettlebells, so you don't even understand you're anywhere near the same level as him. It doesn't matter how strong you are, you will not have the same level of physicality that he can bring to the table. And that's why he was an 11-time world champion. Anyway, I asked him, and I was trying to, I do something called long cycle, which is a kettlebell clean with two kettlebells, and then you do something called a jerk, you throw it overhead. And it's a cyclical movement. You're not allowed to put the kettlebell down, or those two kettlebells down, for 10 minutes. So it's a continuous cyclical movement from a clean to an overhead position in which you're challenging yourself for 10 minutes straight. Now, individually, a 24-kilo kettlebell is not particularly heavy. Two 24s is not particularly heavy. Most people have massively bigger deadlifts. You know, a 48-kilo deadlift is not particularly challenging. For a lot of people, pressing two 24-kilo kettlebells overhead is not particularly challenging. It becomes incredibly challenging when you add the duration and the pace to it. So give yourself a go. If you're questioning whether or not it's tough, grab two kettlebells, set a time of 10 minutes, see how far you get. Anyway, I asked him how long it was going to take me to get to the point where I could do two 24s for 10 minutes. And in my head, I was thinking, well, you know, I'm on 216s. They're feeling pretty good at the moment. I've just done 120 reps or 120, I don't know, 126 reps, something like that in 10 minutes with 216s. I was feeling pretty good. I was like, right, well, yeah, I could at least do 100 with 220s. You do some mental maths in your head. So I should be able to do 10 minutes with 224s. And he turns around to me after I say, well, I'm thinking like I'll be able to achieve that in 6 months. And he's like, and he, you know, in his typical slow Russian kind of speaking pattern, he said, oh, 2 years. It's been longer than 2 years, okay? 2 years to get to that level. How much time do most people give themselves to transform their body? 6 weeks, 30 days, 12 weeks? Now, I can do some pretty amazing things in 12 weeks with people. We've got some photos coming on our Instagram very shortly where we're going to show some of the changes that we've done for people, just giving them basic things to do. No crazy workouts, no crazy nutrition plans, just focus. So we can make a big change in 12 weeks. But most people don't give themselves enough time. And that's the big quandary with being a beginner, is you overwhelm yourself with the wrong timeline. You haven't given yourself a goal that's unrealistic, you give yourself an unrealistic timeline. That's how you overcome the beginner issue. Firstly, you've got to accept that you are a beginner. Secondly, you've got to be able to add an element of play. You've got to see it as an opportunity to experience movement, experience whatever you're doing. And the third one is to give yourself a realistic timeline. And that realistic timeline will be based on the pace that you're currently going. So have an idea of where you want to go. That gives you the direction. And then as you start the process, you're going to understand the traffic to get there. Is there a lot of traffic to get there? Skill, time, complexity, you know, whatever it is. All the interactions that the environment throws at you. Those things will add traffic to the pace. And then all you do at any given point is you measure backwards and you think, how far have I come in the last 6 weeks? Right, can I replicate that over the next 6 weeks? Can I up the pace? Is there anything slightly getting in the way? And over time, you get a better idea of the timeline. So most people, could you radically transform your health in 12 weeks? Probably not. Could you do it in 2 years? Yeah, of course you can. So going from a beginner often has no insight into timelines. I see it so frequently. They seem to think that things can happen quicker than they can. And the reality is your body can only change so fast. If you have a very low level of skill, why are you expecting to be able to do something high level? We don't apply this beginner attitude to more complex things like swimming. Most people go, well, why can't I not swim the channel straight away? Well, you have to practice. Why am I not really competent at the violin? I've been playing 6 weeks. Why is things not changing? Why can I not hold down a tune? That feels really unrealistic. As someone who sits there and does that, you say, you've not got the reality right. But we apply that when it comes to things like diet. Why have I not lost any weight? Why have I not done this? Why have I not got abs? Why is this not changing? The impatience there. Fitness is a simple thing. It's simpler than learning an instrument. And as fitness professionals, we're often guilty of making it sound too complex. But the one thing I do know for sure is that the timelines are never what you expect. It does take longer than you think. It takes longer than you think to build muscle, to work up to a heavy deadlift, to work up to a six-pack. All of those things take a long time, okay? The timeline can be shortened with competency and with working with someone who knows what they're doing, but the reality is it's going to take longer than you think. And I think one of the things you can bring to the table as an experienced person, as someone who's done and achieved great things in your career, is that you can bring that career capital in there and you can utilize those skills and apply them in the scenario. So for many people who are good at spreadsheets, why are you not tracking your food? You could track accounts, you can track performance of your team, you can track the performance of the business, but you're not doing it for yourself? Why does one thing require that and you don't do it yourself? So if you can track a spreadsheet, you can track your food. And food's less complicated than most businesses' spreadsheets. If you can keep your team accountable, you can keep yourself accountable. If you can organize a team, you can organize your diary. Okay? If you can motivate someone else at work, you can find some motivation yourself. If you've got an eye for detail at work, you can have an eye for detail in the way you build your meals or the way you approach an exercise. I'm not saying you have to, and I'm not saying you fail if you don't. I'm just saying you already have the skills. You're not lazy. You're not unmotivated. You're not unskilled. You just have a skill set that's been applied in one scenario that you're not applying in this new one. And you don't have to reinvent yourself in order to be good at fitness. You just have to apply a skill set that you already developed in a new scenario. And you've just got to get used to making mistakes in applying that skill set to fitness, to food, to tracking. And that means you have to have some compassion for yourself. So it's tough to become a beginner. I've been there many times. In fact, I quite like it because it's an opportunity to grow. And we grow when things are difficult. Doesn't mean that you have to suffer to grow, but it does mean that you are going to go into territory which is unfamiliar. And that is where growth will happen, because how you adapt to it, how you react to it, is going to be the essence of that growth. So until next week, if you've got any questions, write them below. Thanks for listening to this podcast, and please do subscribe, because most people aren't subscribed to you watching it, and share it with a friend. Many thanks.